He, in effect, turned his command into a sort of a nest of resistance. He attracted officers, or he would seek out officers that he suspected were of like mind, and he would bring them into his circle.
You're not part of the system yet, like generals are. Generals are bought off. Generals were bought off all the time by Hitler. Yeah, they were promised estates in the East, hunting estates. They were given cash bonuses. They were bought off.
That winter of 1942, the German army came to a halt before the gates of Stalingrad. Even when the 6th Army under General von Paulus faced certain defeat, Hitler refused to authorize a withdrawal.
Mein einziger Bruder ist in Stalingrad geblieben und mein Mann hat immer die letzten Funksprüche, die von der Armee kamen, von Paulus zum Hauptquartier Ost kamen, die hat er uns immer nach meiner Mutter und mir durchgesprochen. Die haben wir alle gekriegt, das war so schrecklich. Und der ist auch vermisst, also mein Bruder ist nie wieder nach Hause gekommen. Also eine ganze Armee opferte, aus Prestigegründen.
Stauffenberg was now convinced that Hitler had to be removed. He was so vocal in his criticism that his fellow officers became concerned. It was decided to post him far away, to the 10th Panzer Division in Tunisia.
Which obviously is away from the Holocaust, is away from the SS. There was no SS involvement in North Africa. And I think that was an idea, in effect, to save him from opening his mouth in front of someone and getting into trouble.
Gün dolandı dağı taşı dinmiyor.
In Libya and Tunisia, the victories of the famed Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel had been reversed. The Americans had landed in North Africa during Operation Torch. Rommel launched a daring panzer attack against the still inexperienced American troops, driving all the way to the Kasserine Pass. But the victory was short-lived. The Germans began a fighting retreat. On April 7th, Stauffenberg tried to lead his column through the narrow El Hafai Pass. Fighter bombers caught up with him. Stauffenberg was severely injured. He was taken to a field hospital in Sfax, where he lost his right hand, 2 fingers on his left hand, as well as his left eye.
It was kind of a turning point for him. When I saw him in the hospital in Munich, he said, "It is time for me to save the German Reich." And I replied, "Well, you're in ideal shape to do that now." I thought he was joking, but in hindsight, that was the moment he chose to become involved.
His recovery was slow but steady. On July 5th, he arrived back in Laudlingen for a month-long convalescence. Here he was reunited with his children, Heimeran, Franz Ludwig, and little Valerie, as well as his niece Elizabeth and nephew Alfred. Around that time, the position of Chief of Staff of the General Army Office in the Bendlerstrasse in Berlin became vacant. General Olbricht, well aware of Stauffenberg's commitment to remove Hitler, quickly arranged for Stauffenberg to be offered the post. Stauffenberg immediately agreed. In the early months of 1943, Tresco and his circle had launched a number of attempts to assassinate Hitler. One was a plan to place a bomb on the Führer's aircraft.
Es glückte dem Tresco, 2 als Cognacflasche getarnte Bomben in das Flugzeug zu bringen. Man wusste aber nicht, dass die Zünder sehr frostempfindlich waren. Und da die Bombe unten im Frachtraum deponiert war, explodierten die nicht.
Unfortunately, the fuse either malfunctioned or it was the wrong type of fuse, but it didn't work. It didn't explode. And then, of course, he had the problem of trying to retrieve his bomb before the recipient of the brandy bottles realised that they weren't brandy bottles at all. And he managed to do that, so the plot was never actually uncovered.
In March of 1943, Hitler prepared to come to the arsenal in Berlin to mark the Heroes' Day.
Hitler always paraded, always went through the room, inspected a parade of captured booty and so on.
And his guide through this exhibition was Gersdorff. And Gersdorff had these two, or in effect, British clam mines in his pockets.
Es war genau geplant, eine halbe Stunde, alles war fix und fertig und der Gersdorff wollte auch ein Selbstmordattentat machen.
Unfortunately, Hitler had very little interest in the exhibition.
On this occasion, he raced through it so that there was no possibility of actually trying to assassinate him on that occasion.
Mit dem Gersdorff mit Mühe die Bombe wieder zu entschärfen, aber Hitler war weg. Das waren 3 Attentatsversuche innerhalb von 8 Tagen. Das war sehr deprimierend.
The Valkyrie plan was an official German plan for dealing with some sort of massive internal disturbance within Germany, whether it might be an uprising of foreign labourers or a particularly concentrated air raid which sort of disrupts local services and everything else.
It turns out that in 1944 there were 7.5 million foreign workers in Germany. And the Germans had this worry that there could be a civil disturbance.
Unter dem Motto Valkyrie war geplant, ein Aufstand, falls ein Aufstand der Fremdarbeiter käme. Fremdarbeiter in allen Betrieben, Landwirtschaft, Industrie, gab es sehr viele ausländische Arbeiter. Wenn die einen Aufstand planten, sollte der mit dem, unter dem Stichwort Valkyrie niedergeschlagen werden. Da hat in jedem Korps waren Vorbereitungen getroffen für diesen Zweck.
Now the interesting thing was that the circles of the resistance in the Home Army in the Bendelerstrasse in Berlin were the ones that were in control of that plan. So it seemed very logical for them to turn that operational plan to their own devices.
In August of 1943, Stauffenberg arranged to meet with Henning von Tresckow to discuss the implementation of the Valkyrie plan. They began to draft an outline of the new government that was to take charge immediately after the coup d'etat. General Ludwig Beck would become the head of state. Longtime resistor Karl Friedrich Girdler would become Germany's new chancellor. Von Tresckow would take control of all German security services, including Himmler's Gestapo and SD. General Heppner would become head of the Ministry of War. Either Olbricht or Stauffenberg himself would serve him as state secretary. The only minister in Hitler's government which the plotters intended to retain, if he agreed, was the Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer. Under his leadership, armaments production had actually increased despite the devastating British and American bombing campaigns.
I interviewed Albert Speer, and indeed he knew that he had been penciled in to become Minister of War in the new government had Hitler been assassinated, and all of that had been carried off successfully.
And of course Stauffenberg had been away from Berlin, and only when he was called to Berlin in order to become the Chief of Staff first of the Allgemeines Heeresamt, only then did he need an apartment in Berlin. And the two brothers had an apartment in a villa in Tristanstraße in Wannsee. It still exists. It's a very nice villa.
Stauffenberg increasingly became the soul and spirit of the Valkyrie plan. But one major problem remained. Nor von Tresckow or other conspirators, such as Merz von Kirnheim, had actual access to the Führer.
So again, it brings us back to this problem that they always had of access. It was very difficult to get access to Hitler. But Hitler always, said that his survival was due to providence. Now, he was talking about the assassination attempts that he knew about, and there were an awful lot that actually he didn't know about at all. And it's very interesting that it wasn't, in the vast majority of cases, it wasn't his security that that protected him. It was purely bad luck.
But then, in June of 1944, Stauffenberg was appointed as Chief of Staff to none other than General Fromm, head of the Home Army. And because Hitler frequently wanted to be appraised of its combat readiness, Stauffenberg suddenly found himself in a position where he himself would see Hitler on an ongoing basis. Of all the conspirators, he was now best placed to become the assassin. The keen interest in the status of the Reserve Army was prompted by the successful Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944. For the time being, the Allied armies were bottled up in the peninsula, but it was only a matter of time before they would break out. Knowing this, Field Marshal Rommel, commander of Army Group B in France, had finally agreed to cooperate with the conspiracy, which in the West was headed by the military governor of France, General von Stulpnagel. The success of Valkyrie therefore depended heavily on Stulpnagel and his deputy, none other than Stauffenberg's cousin, Caesar von Hofecker.
Stulpnagel was his immediate boss, and I think my father and Stulpnagel were very good friends at the end.
Another key figure in the conspiracy was General von Hase, city commander of Berlin.
Unterstand ihm ja der Valkyrie-Befehl und hatte Truppen, und mit diesen Truppen sollte zum Beispiel Goebbels festnehmen. Diesen Befehl durchzuführen, hatte den Oberst Rehmer, der ihm unterstand, beauftragt, Goebbels festzunehmen.
Where the plot began to fall down was that Stauffenberg couldn't be in two places at once. He was instrumental in organising the operation of Valkyrie in Berlin, so he needed to be there. He was a tremendously powerful, dynamic man, so he could, pick up the phone and talk to all corners of Germany at once and convince everybody to act in the way that they should do. But at the same time, he realised that summer that he actually had to be the assassin as well. So he also had to be 300 miles to the east, planting the bomb in the map room in Rastenburg.
Since Stauffenberg had to remain alive and return to Berlin to orchestrate the coup, he had to use a timer in the form of a fuse.
Und wir haben diese Versuche gemacht.